And it's the 9 o'clock hour here on WJLX. James Phillips, and we're going to pause the music for a few minutes to welcome in a special guest, something that we're hoping to do pretty often here, if we can keep the interviewer healthy, and hopefully that's going on. But we've got a special guest in the studio today. We've got Ryan Cagle, who just finished the Democratic primary for Senate 5 and won the primary. Congratulations, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, James.
That was quite the turnout the other night, right? Like 400 people made their voices heard.
Yeah, we expected it to be low,
right.
Special election and primary, but we're hoping maybe a little bit of a different turnout come the general election.
Right. Well, let's just get right into it and talk about the election and what made you decide that you wanted to run for Senate District 5?
There's a lot of reasons. I think out the gate, though, is that Senate District 5 has not had a chance at democracy since 2007, roughly. We haven't had options, and at the very least, regardless of where you fall in the political spectrum, I think our communities deserve options. Otherwise, it's not democracy. We're just appointing whatever party is dominating that area into that position. And for 2 decades, almost, in the Senate District 5, we've functionally had an appointee system where the Republican nominee is getting appointed because there's been no one to contest that race, whether independent, Democrat, or any other political party. And so I think that's a big thing, is because we say we want democracy, we want options, we want those kind of things, and so that's where it really started for me. But the other thing is just being that overall, I think that we have a fundamental lack of representation for working class people in this district, and we have a fundamental lack of representation for the most vulnerable and the people who have the least amount of agency and power in this community.
Well, and we're talking to Ryan Cagle. He just won the Senate 5 Democratic primary. For people who don't know, they probably recognize the name. Where have I heard that name? Oh, well, you probably heard it because he's the troublemaker that's always talking about Tony Mitchell's case or things like that. But tell people a little bit about your background, where you're from, just a little bit so people know more about who Ryan Cagle is.
Yeah, so I think I grew up in Parrish. My whole life I graduated from there, from Parrish High School, and I actually still live on the same street that I lived on as a child, which is a wild thing. And so I grew up here, grew up in this community, and as a teenager, had a love-hate relationship with Walker County, and thought I needed to get out and get somewhere else. And I quickly realized that no place, I was out west for a while doing work there for the Episcopal Church, and I realized as much as I loved it, it wasn't home, that I missed my people, I missed the place. And so my family came back after a few years being gone, and have been back for 4 years now this June, and have been causing good trouble, we hope. Me and my wife have 2 wild children, and we co-volunteer lead an organization called Jubilee House, which does a lot of things in the world, community gardens. We have a 24/7 food pantry. We have a free store. And probably the most prominent thing of the last year has been, because we're tired of waiting on our elected officials in our state to respond to the opioid crisis, we launched the state's first 24/7 Narcan vending machine, free Narcan vending machine, and then launched the state's second and third Narcan distribution sites across Walker County. And in the last year, we've distributed over 7,000 doses of Narcan into the community to reverse overdose. And those numbers, I think, although we can't prove it, we can look at those hospitalization numbers and look at those things and see that there has been a drastic decrease in overdose-related hospitalizations and RPS calls. And so we hope that we're making an impact there. And so really, we just came back a few years ago and decided, what is the quickest thing we can do to begin to love our community and just get our roots back recultivated here. And so that's what we've done. And I come, again, from a long line. I think my whole family lives within a quarter mile of each other and has for most of my life in Parrish. I come from a working class background, a dad who's a heavy equipment operator and a vet, a Navy veteran, and a grandfather who was a union man, a welder by trade, who worked in the boilermaker industry and those kind of things. And in the coal mine, on my mother's side in the coal mines and those things. And so just have long roots to this community and long roots to working class values and background, and just care about it and want to see it thrive.
Talk about District 5 a little bit, and what you think are some of the keys that need to happen in District 5. What are things that people need to know about that maybe they haven't heard about because of the politics and things like that.
Right. Well, I think, probably most people have heard about the opioid crisis. I don't think people understand the level of which that this district, and in particularly Walker County, is the epicenter of this crisis in the state. It's one of the highest places in the nation for opiate use and opiate overdose. We far exceed everyone else in the state, and that's an issue, but it is wrapped up in multiple other issues. It's wrapped up, the opiate crisis is exacerbated by poverty, is exacerbated by a lack of mental health care, it's exacerbated by these economic situations that are putting people in positions where they're turning to these things to cope, in a situation where they're not able to feed themselves and care for themselves and pay their bills, and we see that degradation happen in families. And so that's the thing, but on the working class side of things, I think here in District 5, we here, especially in Walker County, we've had a lot of recent economic development in the sense we've had businesses coming in, creating, a couple dozen jobs here and there, factories and those things, and all those things are good. But we have a long history in this community, unfortunately, of where businesses come in and they provide some economic benefit while extracting labor and time and resources from a community, and then when they're done, they're done. They pack up and they go home. And that's a story as old as this community's been here. We can go all the way back to the mining towns, and we can go all the way back to all those things. And we're quick to say, things like, coal built this community, but in reality, coal workers built this community. But unfortunately, when coal companies had their fill, they left us here. And then our community had to figure out what to do in the wake of that, in the wake of the railroad packing up, in the wake of the coal industry, and now several, manufacturing and textile mills, all those things. We can look back and see that same pattern repeating itself. And I think that's something that's not addressed. It's not enough just to bring businesses here. We need to be able to think about how the long-term economic benefits of making sure our communities are sustainable, not just having to jump to the next thing. The other thing I think is that, as being someone who works closely in a community that is kind of riddled with poverty, is that we're constantly seeing people who come to Jubilee House calling us, we're a completely volunteer-run organization, who are needing us to pay their power bills because they're about to be evicted. They have nothing, they have no money, they got sick, they lost their job. Those are the things that I encounter on a daily basis. And those are the things we have to find a way to address. We are patchworking it. Nonprofits in this community are patchworking responses to those things, but it's not enough. And ultimately, it's a fundamental failure on a communal level, and a level to be able to make and sustain a way forward for our communities to thrive. And so, I think that's a big thing. And I think the way that Alabama Power and these utility bills in so many of our communities are crushing so many people, and we have to, we're having summers with it's so hot and so full of drought that not having an air conditioner can be deadly at times, and extreme weather in the winter. And so I think those are issues that are a big thing.
And we've seen the news releases. We know they're making billions of dollars.
Right, yeah, and with no concern about what's going on with everyday people. If you have $1 million in investment properties and are making $500,000 a year or whatever, then you're not worried about Alabama Power. That utility bill don't mean much to you. But if you're a single mom, like my mom was growing up, raising 3 kids and caring for us, then it makes a big difference. It's hard to put food on the table and those kind of things. And
especially like grocery tax. People like to talk about we get rid of the grocery tax, that sort of thing. But the grocery tax, nobody's concerned about that other than people who are struggling.
Right.
That's the only people that it's affecting.
Right.
But I mean, that's a great help to get rid of that. But those few pennies aren't helping in the long run when you look at power bills and things like that.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't make up for the difference that is negatively impacting our communities, And I think there's a lot of smaller other issues people don't think about. We're rural communities, so we have a fundamental lack of transportation available, and people will say, well, we have services or whatever, but I talk regularly, like I have a dear friend in Carbon Hill who has no way of going, and it costs her $32 just to get to the doctor in Jasper and back in one day, and then she has to wait for hours. She loses her whole day for one doctor's trip that she has to have. And so $32 is a lot of money when you're someone who is living on your Social Security and your retirement. and it doesn't go a long way, especially in that regard. And so there's all kinds of a myriad of issues, I think, facing our community that we need to think about critically and challenge. I'm worried about the long-term viability of our health system as our state continues to refuse Medicaid expansion and continues to close rural hospitals and clinics all across the state over the last decade. I'm worried about what that looks like for District 5 in Walker County. I know for me, like without Capstone, I would not have most of my health care for my entire life has come through Capstone because my family has been poor or working class my whole life, and we have gone there to that clinic, and they're a saving grace. But I worry about the future of what that looks like when we look at the trend that's happening across the state and our state's leadership's failures to address that need. It's just a matter of time before it hits here home, so to speak. Even if it's not at the moment. And there's a lot of issues. I think about schools. I have friends who are teachers. My brother's a teacher. I think about the lack of funding and not too big classrooms, those things. I have a lot of conversations with them about stuff in education. I worry about this right to choose bill and taking money away from these schools that are already really struggling. I think back to my senior year in high school, our Walker County school system, I could not praise it enough, but when I think back on my senior year of high school in 2009, we had multiple classes where there weren't even enough books for us to carry them home. We were a class of 20 kids, and there wasn't enough textbooks for us to carry those books home. And so those trends and those kind of things, they're still prevalent in our school system. But at the end of the day, I know when I think about our teachers and I think about our school system, I see people who are doing the work with what little they have. They're multiplying loaves and fish. Because I think about myself, who has nothing prior to, I had a high school education in Parrish and managed to get myself into grad school, and I am 1.5 semesters away from graduating with 2 master's degrees. And that has to do with the tenacity that I learned in that place and teachers who were willing to make do with what they had. And but we shouldn't have to do that,
Right. Well, to remind everybody, we're talking to Ryan Cagle. He just won the Senate 5 Democratic primary. And we'll be facing off against Republican Matt Woods in June. Is that June 24th? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That'll be the general election. We're going to take a quick break and go back to the music for a couple of songs, and then we'll be back to talk more about things that are going on in District 5 and some other things that Ryan is involved with throughout the community. So we'll be right back on WJLX. And we're back on WJLX. The two most controversial guys in Walker County are in the room with Jonathan Timmons and Terrell Manaska. James Phillips and Ryan Cagle speaking today. Ryan, we've talked a little bit about Senate District 5 and your choice to run for the Democratic seat in that. But let's talk a little bit too about where a lot of people have seen your name, heard your name, read it, seen you on television, the Tony Mitchell case. Yeah. And I know we don't want to just belabor that and stay on that, but a lot of people know you from that and have, you've really been outspoken. You've been kind of the mouthpiece of the movement to see justice for Tony Mitchell. So tell us a little bit about why you got involved and kind of where that's at, where it's been.
Yeah, I think I get asked that a lot because I didn't know Tony Mitchell. I get asked that a lot, and I think it comes down to me as right is right and wrong is wrong. I've had people say stuff to me over and over, and they, I can't believe you're doing this. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be brave enough. All these things, and it doesn't come down to bravery. It doesn't come down to any of those things. It comes down to it's the right thing to do for me. And I was here. Obviously, we were living here when it happened, and several people started protesting and kind of bringing light to it. And I kind of came in to help in whatever way I could, and have somehow ended up at the front, not necessarily by my choosing. And you can ask anyone about that. But been on the forefront because I believe in accountability. I believe, I believe that our community can't allow these kind of things to happen. I want my kids to grow up here and be safe, and I want those who are supposed to be serving and protecting them in law enforcement to do just that. And that's not have to worry about. No family should have to worry about getting a mental health check and ending up in the situation that happened for Tony. And I think that's a big thing. Someone. I've tried to, when I talk about the Senate stuff specifically, I've not even brought up Tony and vice versa, but they do come, the the desire to do, the sentence of comes out of the same desire of wanting to see a better Walker County and a healthy Walker County and a flourishing Walker County. And so this is just one of those issues. I've known a bunch of Tonys in my life, even though I didn't know Tony. I'm related to several Tonys in my life. People who have been failed by our community as a whole, who've been failed in the wake of the opiate crisis and the mental health crises that are impacting our district. And so those are things that, have impacted me directly. My father was a victim of the opioid crisis a couple years ago. And so this is something that's just been close to me. When I knew this was happening, I just wanted accountability and transparency and to join with others in calling and making that call. And so it's just been important in that way. And I just want this family to be able to have some kind of closure, and I want our community to be able to move forward. And we can't do that if we keep doing what we've always done. And we're quick to say, whether you're a proponent or against, quick to say, oh, there's always been issues in the jail. Well, that's the problem, is there's always been issues in the jail, and we finally have concrete evidence of these things, and we need a change. We need accountability, and unfortunately, our sheriff has eschewed any form of accountability over the last 2 years. He's painted us as making personal attacks, as kind of a pseudo-religious persecution, which is bizarre to me as someone who considers themselves or tries my best to live faithfully to the way of Christ and in this community and love my neighbor. Those things have been really bizarre over the last 2 years, and at the end of the day, no one is out here being, there might be, some Facebook comments, I'm sure people are getting overboard or are getting hateful or spiteful and those things, but at the end of the day, it's never been about that. It's never been about even calling any of these deputies or sheriff or whoever out. It's about calling them in to repair, to repentance and repair, and that's something you can't just acknowledge a wrong. You have to work to right the wrong. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't even had an acknowledgement of the wrong. We've not had any sense of contrition or remorse come from that office. And that's deeply concerning to me as a constituent. It's deeply concerning to me as an individual and in this community. And it's deeply concerning to me as someone who wants to have our elected officials be held to a proper standard. And so, yeah, it's kind of been a wild 2 years. It's put a lot of stress in my life and on my family. A lot of things I'm looking forward to when all this wraps up. Obviously, I'm looking forward to this family, Tony's family, to be able to have some kind of closure in our community moving forward. But I'm also worried about never having to talk about this issue overtly again. And I'm looking forward to not being interviewed about it, about another indictment and another plea deal, because at the end of the day, it needs to be about healing. It's not about anything else. And until all of this gets brought to light and all of it gets handled and everyone gets held accountable, we can't find healing as a community. And it's caused a massive rift in this community. It has. And so far, those fires just continue to be stoked instead of just accountability, instead of just honesty and transparency. We've been lied to over and over. I mean, every step of the way, just minuscule little things add up. And to me, that it might, a little white lie I grew up hearing, as a kid. Oh, it's just a little white lie, but that's not the truth. Because if you're willing to lie and misconstrue the truth in something so small and seemingly insignificant, then how could we trust you as an elected official or a person with power, whether it's someone else in the jail or another elected official outside of the jail? How can we trust you to actually lead and serve this community if you can't be honest? And so for us, that's a big part of it. And so yeah, it's been a weird 2 years. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to doing the right thing. It comes down to calling people in and calling for repentance and repair, because again, it has nothing to do with hate. It has nothing to do with even personally these people. I have nothing, personally against any of these deputies or against the sheriff or even against our elected officials who are currently remaining silent and have for 2 years, whether that's local elected officials all the way up to Kay Ivey, whether it's our House representatives, whether, it's Greg Reed before he stepped down. There's been a unbelievable silence in the face of this, and I have nothing personally against them, but as elected officials, I am greatly disappointed in how they have handled this situation as well. So Walker County deserves better, and that's really what it comes down to. We deserve a safe community and a cared for community.
Well, and whether people agree with the way you've handled things or your message or whatever, they should at least appreciate the passion that you've shown and that you've shown for your community. One thing that I think that you should talk to or speak to also is, okay, we mentioned at the beginning you got 300 and something votes a couple days ago. It's going to take a lot more than that to even make a dent in being able to move forward to be the next senator. How do you connect with people in Walker County or in District 5 to be able to grow that. So what are your ideas? How can you connect with the everyday person?
Yeah, I think by virtue of my own life, I connect with them because I'm just a working class person in this community. I don't own some big business. I'm not backed by big corporations and those things. And those are the things that I believe that we desperately need in a representative. We desperately need someone who is interested and connected to actual working class and vulnerable people in our communities, because that's the people I live amongst. That's who I am. Me and my family, we struggle month to month under the weight of the power bills and those kind of things. I've had to find employment outside of the state as a distance employee just to be able to make sure I'm feeding my kids and able to put myself through school and those kind of things. And so that's a big thing. And one of the things I guess I really hope for is, because that D beside my name, we've talked about this a bunch, is going to immediately throw some people off. But we have to come to a place, I think, in this community where we care more about the people than we do a party. And for decades now, party affiliation has been the end-all, be-all. And at the end of the day, that just it's not gotten us anywhere. We're still the opioid crisis is worse, the mental health crisis is worse, the poverty crisis, the hunger crisis. All those things are getting worse every single day and every year, and yet we continue to elect and vote the same way and support the same type of policies and politicians. And so something has to change. I wouldn't want anyone to think they're voting for me is like, making them sign up for being a Democrat or something silly like that, because at the end of the day, that party affiliation means so little. What it matters to me is where your commitments actually lie. And who funds you and who supports you, and those are the things that I think are important. And so to close that gap, I think it's going to be it's an insurmountable odds, James. This is an 85% Republican district, and it is the voter bloc has voted that way consistently. Even when they didn't even have a choice, they still went out and voted that way. Even when it was guaranteed, we had Greg Reed running unopposed. And so for me, I think to bridge that gap is simply going to have to continue to be about the relationships that we're building. I've had so many messages over the last week telling me, people who were Republicans who voted for me and people who had never voted Democrat in their life voted for me because they knew where my heart was and they knew where I've been working in our community and how I care about our community. So I hope to just continue that over the next few months, to continue to build those relationships, to knock on doors, to get out and have conversations, to hold town halls, to invite people into a conversation for us to be able to actually listen to each other and figure out a way forward and think about critically what our community actually needs. Because there's a lot of culture war going on the national level. There's a lot of appeal to that by our politicians. But ultimately, those things are so insignificant compared to what's actually impacting District 5. And that's where I want to bring it home to. I'm tired of all of this overconflated stuff, and so I want to be able to bring it home and bring it back to the ground and us focus on what the actual needs of District 5 are and how we can respond to those and confront the challenges that we have and overcome them. Because at the end of the day, no one's coming here to save us. Right? No politician, not me, not Matt Woods, not Donald Trump, not Kamala Harris, no one is coming to District 5 to save us. The only way we get through the future, only way we get through these crises, the only way we find a way forward to make sure our neighbors are fed and people are clothed and people are not homeless and struggling and dying of overdose is by coming together as a community across those different boundary lines, across those different ideologies, and saying we can take care of one another. We can do this. We can have a different way of being together in Walker County, and that's central to where I stand on all of this. Is that at the end of the day, we can do things differently, and we can be an example to the rest of the world. That's going all the way back to our advocacy to the county commission about the opioids, nearly $2 million coming into the county from the opioid settlement funds. They were like, well, this is not really a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. I was like, you're right, but we can set a standard for the rest of the state. We can say, hey, this is what you can do with this money. This is how you can impact this crisis. This is how we can, and we can set a standard for everyone else. We could be an example, and I believe that. I believe District 5 can be an example to the rest of the state of what it looks like to put our people first, put our people before our parties, and put our people before our paychecks and our politicians and being bought by big corporations and those kind of things. So that's what I hope to appeal to. I hope to appeal to those people that live the same way I live, regardless of where we differ on ideology, because we're all in this together, and I don't think we're getting out of it any other way than together. And so, yeah, that's what I hope. And at the end of the day, again, like I said, these are insurmountable odds. Voting-wise, special elections are already rough anyway. The voter turnout is going to be really low, especially for a Democratic primary like we saw. It was very low, and part of that was because there's not been a Democratic primary in any meaningful way happen in this community in decades, so didn't expect a whole lot different, to be honest with you. But I keep coming back to this quote, and I mentioned it to you earlier, James, before we even got started, was Aya Stone, she's a journalist, she talks about the only fights worth fighting are the ones you're going to lose. Because someone has to fight and lose and fight and lose and fight and lose until someone who believes like you one day can win it. And at the end of the day, if nothing else, this Senate run is a seed. It's a seed for hopefully helping people in this community, in this district, see that things can be different and that we don't have to allow things to divide us, and we can care about each other and we can care about our people and we can find a way forward, and that our politicians should reflect that. Our politicians should reflect their voter base in that the people and their problems and the things they're facing. And so at the end of the day, that's what I hope, if nothing else, that this Senate run will be a seed for that. It'll be a seed planted for the future, and it might blossom into a tree and it's fruit who I never get to eat of, but hopefully my kids will. Hopefully my kids will see a District 5 where we are prioritizing people and the needs of our community and our neighbors over party affiliation or cultural war.
Well, and just to remind everybody, we're talking to Ryan Cagle. He's the Senate District 5 Democratic candidate now, after the primary. And Ryan, anybody who probably knows your name, heard your name, they're like, that guy's always serious. Like, we've seen him on the television news, we hear him, we read him in the newspaper. He's always talking about so much serious stuff. So let's talk about something maybe not as serious. We're on the radio. What's your favorite type of music? Like, if you need a song, if there's one song that will chill out Ryan Cagle, what is it?
Well, lately, that's a hard question, but lately, All Yourn by Tyler Childers has been just a good old love song, Appalachian folk love song. And when I'm feeling really, I guess, stressed out, that's one of the albums I go to. It's either that or the band Knocked Loose, which is not something you will ever hear on this radio station.
Wait a minute. You don't tell me what the program on my radio is. I'm thinking maybe we do a Knocked Loose or a Metal Hour,
listen,
10 to 12 or something like that.
I would love it. I would absolutely love to hear Knocked Loose coming from our local radio station. So yeah, I usually pivot between it's one extreme or the other. It's like this, folk kind of Appalachian country music, or it's really hardcore.
Screaming at you.
A lot of screaming, a lot of getting that energy out. So
I expect you to say "Hit me with your best shot" for some reason.
I do like some classics. I do. I feel like I came up in a very musically diverse home. A lot of different influences. I think back to my early years. I think my first cassette tape that I had was 9 Lives by Aerosmith. And that was the first thing, only cassette tape I had, I think, for a long time. And then my first CD was the Offspring's Americana, which was radically different, and then Creedence Clearwater Revival. And so I just grew up on a lot of weird mix and heavy doses of like Tupac and things in there too, in my early formative years. And so I have a wide palette when it comes to music. But
I got one more too. You talk about being a farmer, a mad farmer. But farming and gardening, some people find some release in that. So what are you farming out there?
Yeah. So
tell me about your farm.
Yeah. So So Mad Farmer is actually a reference back to the philosopher and poet and writer thinker Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is a native-born Kentuckian thinker, brilliant agrarian, and he has this poem, a series of poems that connected to the Mad Farmer Manifesto. And so his idea of like this mad farmer is someone who is so committed to the land and their place that they're just going to continue to love it, like with a vehement love, and care for it in that way, even if it looks crazy to the rest of the world. And so we have a very expansive garden in our yard, kind of what we would call a food forest, actually. And then we have the community garden that Jubilee House runs, and we're actually in the process of building an entire farm on the old football field off of 4th Street in Parrish. And so all of these are kind of early things in development. But for us, the things we grow the most, the things I look forward to growing the most, that brings, I think, me and my wife both the most joy, are sweet potatoes. There's just nothing like being able to plant these sweet potatoes in a variety of sweet potatoes and dig them out of the earth. There's something that is just so like viscerally and aesthetically joyful and pleasing to be able to go out into this bed and pull out these huge sweet potatoes with your bare hands. And And then those sweet potatoes last us, almost for the whole year after that. So, and that's our big thing at the community garden. Every year we have a big Jamboree Harvest Festival where all these community kids get to come and be in like 2 foot deep soil, digging out sweet potatoes by hand, and it is just chaotic and beautiful. And so yeah, that's the thing that I love the most, and it is very much a cathartic. It is very a cathartic thing to be able to go out and be amongst your food and know where it comes from and care for it and love it as a type of a neighbor almost that's giving you life. And so I think that is very much an important part of our lives too. So
The Jamboree, I'm so stoked for the Jamboree now.
Can Smashley play at the Jamboree?
it is a good time. It is. You've never seen, like, you just think about small children acting as wild as they've ever, just dirt everywhere, and just pulling up the sweet potatoes. Who can find the biggest, the smallest, the weirdest looking one? I think we harvested like 150 pounds last year out of the one bed we did at the community garden. And so, yeah, it's a really good time. And then all that food goes into the food pantry in Parrish. But
I'll be happy to MC the Jamboree even.
Yeah, I would love that.
I will volunteer for that. Well, tell us just, as we close it out here, tell me one thing that people need to know about Ryan Cagle that they may not know. Like, give us one thing that they can take away from this little short time.
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know. I'm fortunately chronically online and in the news these days, so I don't know that there's a lot of things people don't know that would be beneficial.
Or what might be the one thing that you would, because people see you online and they see your presence there and they see you talking about the different things that you talk about. Maybe what's the biggest misconception? Something there's got to be, because I mean, anytime that you're as public as people like us are, there's a misconception out there. So what do you think maybe is the biggest misconception that people?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, particularly because of the Tony Mitchell stuff, people think I'm always angry, and that's just not the case. I have been so much joy in my life, in the garden, with my family, with my kids, and my community, and those are the things that sustain me. Those are the things that I want to be known for. That I am trying my best to just celebrate the beauty of this community in the midst of the tragedy that we're experiencing with Tony Mitchell and the various things going on. Is that I'm not out here with an axe to grind. I'm just trying to sow seeds.
I think that's a good way to end it there too.
Great.
Well, Ryan, we appreciate you joining us today. This is something, as I said, that we want to start doing a lot more of, having people from the community come in. We thought it was a timely time for this since you won the primary on Tuesday, and much success moving forward. And hopefully, as we get closer to the general election, we can have you and Matt maybe even come together at some point and have a little forum. That's what we're going to try to do in the future here at the radio station. I know Brett did a lot of that sort of stuff, and so we want to try to do that to inform our community and let the community be able to hear from the people who are wanting to be their elected officials. So thanks for taking time to come in and talk to us. Coming up next, we're going to have the professor of rock and roll, Woody Wilson, will be here for his daily show, and be sure to check him out. And then we'll have plenty of baseball and softball coming up in the next week or so. I'll be at some games next week, and I can't wait to do that. So I'm glad I'm getting back in the swing of things. Ryan, thanks for joining us. For Jonathan Timmons and Terrell Manasco, I'm James Phillips. Keep listening to WJLX.